Some people on the internet believe if you carry appendix, it's just a matter of time before you shoot yourself in the leg. Or worse. This is Jeff from Tenicor. I have carried a gun for close to 25 years, and I've been carrying appendix for almost 15 years, and I have yet to shoot myself. Appendix carry has been around as long as guns have been around. Today we're going to talk about whether or not appendix carry is as dangerous as many on the internet say it is. We'll also cover what it is and why you should care. And finally, we'll talk about what your mindset and your training process should be if you choose to carry appendix. We are designed as predators. We have binocular vision. All of the work that we do is usually in front of us. Like generally we don't gesture out here, we gesture with our hands here. We don't fight out here, we fight here. With appendix carry, there's something natural and intuitive about taking equipment or something you know you're going to use and putting it in your waistband, particularly if it is in the front area that's easy to access. I had a friend of mine who used to carry hip carry all the time. He was at a concert. Someone bumped into the gun, the grip of the gun, and noticed it. From that point on, he was like, I'm never gonna carry hip carry again, and always carried appendix carry because the gun is more in your domain of control. Tools and other items that we want to access quickly, we put them in the front somewhere. And so if you want to be able to securely and quickly access your gun, carrying it somewhere in the front is going to be a more intuitive and natural mode of carry. And so that's all appendix carry is. Appendix carry is basically carrying the gun inside your waistband, kind of between the hip points, from about 1030 to about 130. Appendix carry is also more concealable for most people. So you can take a gun of the same size, it's more concealable appendix with the right belt and the right holster than it is on the hip. And typically people can carry and conceal larger guns in the appendix position. Carrying appendix allows you to not have to adjust your clothing as much. You can wear fitted clothing or athletic clothing. You don't have to have big baggy clothing. And then you also don't have to think about how you move. If you go and bend over, you don't always have to make sure you're squatting. You can bend forward and not print behind the hip. So would you ever take a gun, point it at your hand, and pull the trigger? Prior to Tenicor, I was a police officer, and I had a colleague who had been a law enforcement officer for many years, military prior to that. And not only was he a police officer, but he was a firearms instructor. This guy was a very smart, respected police officer. However, he took a 1911, pointed it at his hand, and center punched his hand with a .45. Your first temptation might be to say, that guy's an idiot, I would never do that. And that is probably his perspective as well prior to that incident. The issue here is that he did not fully embrace and internalize the universal firearm handling rules, and he basically had two sets of gun handling rules. One for dangerous loaded guns and another one for safe unloaded guns. Rules only matter if they change behavior. So what you need to do is internalize those rules so that they drive behavior, and they're not just some rules written on some poster somewhere that don't matter. The use of guns by definition is lethal force. They are dangerous. Their purpose is to be used to take life of an animal or life of a person when necessary. In order to handle this dangerous thing safely, you have to embrace a proper mindset about skill and about how you think about the gun. With appendix carry, it's not an issue of is it dangerous or not dangerous. It's dangerous because it's a gun. With appendix carry versus hip carry also has the risk of shooting yourself. But if you shoot yourself hip carry, you're likely shooting yourself in the butt cheek. If you're shooting yourself when you are carrying appendix, it is a higher risk that you shoot something like your femoral artery. Many people, when they're carrying hip carry, because of their shape and size, particularly like women who have wider hips than their waist, when they go and holster their inside the waistband hip carry gun, they are likely pointing the gun at themselves. They're pointing the gun at their hip or their butt cheek, and they don't even realize it because they're not able to see it. Appendix carry is you can actually see everything, and so it subconsciously feels more dangerous than it actually is. Appendix carry with proper skill and proper equipment may be the only mode of carry where you actually, when you holster and unholster, are not pointing the gun at yourself. And we'll demonstrate that later in the video. So gun safety and gun handling rules are for when you're handling the gun. When you're not handling the gun, those rules don't apply. If they did apply, then doing something like carrying a gun on your hip and laying down and shooting a rifle in the prone would be a violation of the rules and would be inherently dangerous, and you should not ever do that. And in that example, it seems obvious, like of course you can do that, and that's because a gun in a holster is secure, and that it is different than handling the gun. And the same thing applies to appendix carry. So yes, when you move around, when you sit down, when you do those things, is the gun secure in the holster pointing at yourself or maybe somebody else? Yes, it is possible, but it is only acceptable because the gun is secure and you're not actually handling the gun. So to the question, is appendix carry safe? Yes, it is, but guns are dangerous. To handle the dangerous guns, you must submit yourself to the proper mindset, to understand the universal firearm handling rules, to let them affect and drive behavior so you don't point a gun at anything you're not willing to shoot. And that drives your skills and your tactics and your equipment, and you ensure you have defined skill set and defined equipment to make it so you always holster and unholster safely. 25 plus years ago when I first started carrying a gun, it was odd, right? I think most people have that feeling when you first start carrying a loaded gun concealed on your person out in public. It seems odd, and you go through, there's a whole bunch of things you don't know, and you go through this big learning process. You do all sorts of things that conventionally don't really make sense, but because it feels weird, you're subconsciously uncomfortable, right? I remember first carrying a gun, that was like the only thing I could think about. There's a gun, I have a gun on, I got a gun on, I got a gun on. See, it was like my mind was occupied with it because it was so weird. By the time I started carrying appendix, maybe 15 years ago, I had a fair amount of formal training. I was a police officer. I had been an instructor in law enforcement and in the private sector for several years at that point. But still, even then, carrying appendix was a little odd. At that point, I was already in the process of designing and developing holster prototypes. And so a bunch of my time carrying appendix early on was just with an unloaded gun or a dummy gun around the house. Perfectly safe to do that, not safe to carry an unloaded gun out in the world. But get repetitions at doing the new and uncomfortable thing in a safe training environment, and learn how to do it well and become comfortable with it, and then apply that to real world situations. So while I believe that appendix carry is perfectly safe, I do believe that it is more of a mature skill set. So if I had a brand new shooter who's never really shot before and never carried a gun, I probably wouldn't encourage them to carry appendix because it is perfectly safe, but the margin for error is smaller. And so they have to have cultivated the right mindset and adopted a very specific skill set to ensure that they can carry a gun, draw a gun, reholster a gun safely. The risk with hip carry is smaller and the margin of error is larger. And so I would encourage most people when they first get a gun to get themselves an outside the waistband hip carry holster and do most of their initial training and learning that way before they go into something like appendix carry. So if I only had a few minutes to tell somebody how do you carry appendix safely, this is what I would say. So most of the danger with appendix carry comes from the reholstering process. When you are new, you want to make sure you are very deliberate about how you clear your cover garment. And when you clear your cover garment, you want to be able to look down and see that there is nothing in the way at all. Make sure you have pants, a belt, holster, and a shirt set up correctly. You don't want things like your pants getting stuck weirdly behind your belt or your shirt tucked in weird in and or around the holster. You want to make sure that when you clear your cover garment, there is a very clear opening to reinsert the gun, and then you also want to have some sort of muzzle wedge or body contour on the gun so that the gun muzzle as it is going into the holster is oriented out and away from your body. As you bring your gun to the holster, you want to make sure rather than pointing the muzzle at the holster and finding it, which will end up having you point the gun at yourself, you want to bring the heel of your hand and thumb to your stomach so that the top of the gun is touching your body and the muzzle is oriented away. And then you want to rotate the muzzle down to find the opening in the holster. And then with a proper holster, with a body contour or a wedge of some sort, you should safely be able to reinsert the gun without flagging yourself and without causing any issues. If you don't have a muzzle wedge or a body contour on your holster, or you want to increase your margin of error, you can change your body position. So you can step back, and then you can also take your hips and tilt your hips forward. And that will basically take the angle of the holster and it'll push the holster out away from your body, which will allow you a larger margin of error for safely holstering the gun. That is not a requirement, but it is certainly an option, particularly if your equipment is not optimized for safety. One of the important things with reholstering is you want to have a very deliberate skill set, right? You don't necessarily need to do it fast, but you do need to do it deliberately. And if you do it deliberately, you will have reduced the friction points around holstering and it won't be herky-jerky and it'll end up being fast. So to carry appendix safely, you have to have an intentional mindset and understand the safety rules in such a way that they change your behavior. And then you have to have a very deliberate, defined skill set that allows you to present the gun consistently the same time every time, reholster the gun consistently the same time every time, inside that safe margin of error. If you'd like to avoid other common concealed carry mistakes, then check out this recent video.